Okay, my ELA friends, so it's time for another rhetorical analysis writing workshop. So the other day in my Facebook group, Teachers Making Better Writers, and in the AP Language and Composition Facebook group, I posed the question of this. What are some really easy, accessible launching points into rhetorical analysis? So simple text, because I find that, I always start with argument, then I do synthesis, and then I do rhetorical analysis. That's how I structure my course. I tend to go easiest to the most complex. And everyone seems to be on the bus with me up until I get to rhetorical analysis, and then I have a lot of lost kids. It's very difficult expository mode, very difficult discipline to teach and to learn. But I know that I often throw at my students some heavy hitters. So one of the gentlemen in the AP language group suggested this piece here. It's called Hurricane Season Can Make a Storm Shudder by Dave Barry. And that same gentleman suggested Judy Blume's Is Harry Potter Evil, which I posted a writing workshop video to my YouTube channel for that. So I'm going to start my year with these two pieces. I think they're great suggestions. And what I'm going to do for this writing workshop is status quo. I'm going to keep it the same. So even though this is an easier, accessible text, we'll take a look at how to construct the introductory paragraph with the declarative and inverted thesis, and then we'll tackle all of the body paragraphs syllogistically. So without further ado, let's jump right in. My caveat, of course, is this. You got to Bob Ross your instructions. So here's what I mean by that. When you sit down with your students and say, all right, kids, today we're going to write an essay, a rhetorical analysis about hurricane season can make a storm shudder. We've done our Socratic seminar. We've done our fishbowl. We've done our Harkness discussion. We've done our Plato's Plato discussion. Whatever modality you're going to use, here's a graphic organizer. On your mark, get set, go. That typically doesn't work. What works best is to use templates. So you can use my templates or anybody else's templates, and you position yourself as the expert writer in the classroom and write with your students. So just kind of follow my lead here. So I'm going to show you 3 declarative theses and a couple of syllogistic body paragraphs. When you do that, when students see models and exemplars, it really demystifies the process for them, which is important, especially early in the academic year when this discipline is fresh and new and very messy and organic in nature. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is this. How do I write the introductory paragraph? We know, for those that are familiar with my work, that given that we're going to be performing rhetorical analysis, we will declare the thesis. I use inverted all the time for literary analysis. So FRQ1 and FRQ2 for lit is always inverted. FRQ2 on Lang is always declared. So for argument, persuasion, and synthesis, it's a 50-50 coin flip. I have a ton of videos to demonstrate that. So it's all contingent upon the phrasing of the prompt, how a student will navigate their thesis in terms of declaring or inverting. But for today, we're going to declare because we're doing rhetorical analysis, which is really nice. You just have one uniform approach to take, and it works like gold every single time. So here's the kicker with this. Implicit in every prompt, and for those of you that have seen my literary analysis workshops, you're gonna say like, "Holy cow, this dude's right." It's absolutely 100% true. So implicit in every prompt, whether it be for the a college board prompt for an FRQ2, or if you're doing rhetorical analysis at a gen ed or dual enrollment course, implicit in every prompt, you have 2 questions for rhetorical analysis and literary analysis. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So here's the big one with rhetorical analysis. I like to declare and tackle the second question first. In literary analysis, I tackled the first question first and proceed through it that way. So I like to get to like the most salient, germane rhetorical features that construct the meaning right out of the gate. And then by extension, you're going to be talking about authorial intent without getting plot summative, without it sounding like a Cliff Note summation or, just some plot heavy drivel. So here's the deal with the declarative thesis. You're going to begin with the thesis. How does the author construct meaning? Right out of the gate. So I tell my students, and we'll take a look at a poster in just a second that I have in my classroom. I tell my students that for rhetorical analysis, I have them focus on the three most salient terms, the three most relevant terms that construct the overall exigence of the piece. So begin with the most important feature. From there, you're going to sprinkle in tier 2 level vocabulary. I find that rhetorical analysis is one of the more geeky intellectual pursuits that we ask our students to do. So it's nice to cop a good academic tone without overdoing it. Ultimately, I want them to teeter-totter balance the colloquial, the vernacular, and the academic. So by tier 2 vocabulary, I simply mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. From there, you're going to need a little bit of context and background without getting plot reiterative. Sentence constructs. Again, if you're new to my work, I ask you to go do a deep dive into some of my other videos where I get into sentence constructs. In brief, I espouse the idea that Strunk and White espouse in their seminal book called Write It Right. And it's the idea that there's 12 different ways to construct a sentence. So you'll see my students wield sentences in a way that yield nice voice rhythm and flow. Typically, when I inherit students, they only use 2 to 3 of the sentence constructs. So a lot of independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences so that it sounds like bop, 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 bop. So I'm sure as you've graded papers over the course of your career, you've read whole essays that proceed with just those 2 or 3 sentence constructs. It's very droning. And then here's the kicker. Every introduction a student writes, whether it's rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, I'll tackle research at some other time, is going to be exactly 4 sentences long, no more, no less, as long as we're using the templates. Inverted, if you're interested in that, go check out some of my literary analysis videos. So I have a ton of stuff for AP literature and Gen Ed in terms of covering all the genres. So plenty of stuff covered there for you if you want to go scope that out. So in my classroom, I have this poster. And I tell my students that we're going to read a lot of speeches, letters, etc., short rhetorical text. And when we see a rhetorical term and or device reappear for a third time, so have seen it 3 separate times in a text, we put that word on our poster. So I just have little Velcro stickers that you adhere to it. And at the time of reading this particular passage, these are the words that we had on our poster. And we're relatively new in rhetorical analysis. You see, I do give my students a little bit of new criticism and deconstruction. They had me for 10th grade as well. So when they come to me as juniors for AP Lang, they are familiar with all of these terms. So when we read, I tell them, go hunting for the terms, go hunting for the devices. And we did a Plato's Plato discussion for this, so their reads were pretty good come time to write. So let's take a look at a few introductions. So we're going to start with the most salient term, okay? And we're going to sprinkle in 3. Declare the thesis with cunning sarcasm. Do you see what the student did right there? Making the assertion that Barry's most relevant term, most germane term is the sarcasm. All right, so very good. So let's see where it goes. With cunning sarcasm, Barry rips the ludicrous tendencies of most Floridians during peak hurricane season. So we started with sarcasm, with tone, citing a long list of paradoxes. So that's our second one. And seemingly contradictory impulses. He pokes fun of the odd behaviors that have become normalized. Delivering his rebukes rather tongue in cheek, his short, simple declarative sentences and parenthetical statements, so syntax is three, seem to deliver his biggest and most poignant punchlines. Logically, the whole state of affairs makes very little sense, but to your average South Floridian, it's perfectly logical. So getting into a little bit of logos there too, which is fine. So that's the thing. They typically focus on three or four of the most important terms and or devices. I don't want it to be a literary terms dumping ground. What is the authorial intent? But chiefly, how does the author construct meaning? So they very clearly have articulated what Barry is doing in the piece. Notice there's no plot summary, right? We're not quoting, we're not plot summarizing, 100% pure, sheer rhetorical analysis. Note the vocab, right? It tends to be elevated, but the kid doesn't sound like a goon. They don't sound pretentious. They don't sound contrived. They're in their wheelhouse. But I like when students use a little bit of colloquial and vernacular. I like the word rips a lot. With cunning sarcasm, Barry rips, right? So sound like you're 16, sound like you're 17, right? Tongue and cheek. So those colloquials and vernaculars mixed in with the other tier two vocabulary adds a nice pizzazz flair. I think when students do this, they're definitely going to get the sophistication point, right? So out of the gate, this kid's blazing. So very, very, very strong. Here's another one going to be done the exact same way. Execute the template the exact same way every single time through wry humor and anecdote. All right, so start with the salience. Barry delineates just how absurd hurricane season is in the south of Florida. The paradoxical nature of how events unfold during these times of crisis is not only comical, but it is absurd. Barry's sentence structure and syntactical manipulations accentuate his bemusement of his fellow Floridians. Through his litany of examples, he highlights just how illogical the whole scene is from start to finish. Four sentences, tier two sentence constructs, get three or four of the most salient, germane terms, devices in there that highlight how Barry constructs his meaning, right? And then get into the intent. What's his purpose? What's his universal theme, I guess, in terms of writing this little editorial here. Number three, different student, going to be done the exact same way. Barry's editorial, while playfully mocking his fellow Floridians, actually proceeds like a classic Aristotelian argument. I love that sentence construct. Look at that. Parentheticals. When I read sample papers, I don't see students doing sentences like that enough. And post exam, teachers were asking me, what do my students need to do to get the sophistication point? It comes down to the vocab, the sentence constructs, but then you got to punctuate with exactitude. So my Nuance Academy really helps students do that, coupled with my Word Study Academy. So let me take this one from the top again. Barry's editorial, while playfully mocking his fellow Floridians, actually proceeds like a classic Aristotelian argument. His premises highlight the irony of the situation while showing the duality within the paradox. And his conclusions, either independent clauses or enclosed in parentheses, deliver his sarcastic poke to the ribs of his fellow neighbors. Logically, how things unfold during hurricane season in the south of Florida is nothing less than absurd. Exactly four sentences, tier two sentence constructs, three or four terms devices every single time. So this has that good colloquial vernacular academic blend as well. I love the where was it? Pokes in the ribs. Where was that? sarcastic poke to the ribs of his fellow neighbors. So when students can do that teeter-totter balance, it's super sophisticated, because I find in rhetorical analysis, students sound too small or they sound too big, and they need to be somewhere in the middle. Colloquial, vernacular, academic. You don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other. So that's how we do the declarative thesis every single time in my classroom. Next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? Easy peasy. And for those that are familiar with my work, you're going to say, holy cow, this guy does not lie. This is easy, easy, easy. We're going to go syllogistic method every single time, every single body paragraph, no matter whether it's rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research. We are always, 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 always going to go with the syllogistic method. In brief, it comes from the Aristotelian tradition. So Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, debate, oration, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they would often throw out topics like this. And for those of you that are familiar with this tradition, maybe you've read the book or are familiar with the book Plato's Republic, in which they toss out the question, what is justice? Every time one of those great philosophical think tankers steps to the mic, he drops a syllogism. And all that means is, for us as composition instructors, it's cogency, is what Aristotle called it. We call it line of reasoning. So look at the line of reasoning in this following syllogism. Premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. When our students write, we want them to be that locked in, that honed in logically, all right? Very mathematical, very computative, very deliberate, very succinct. So in terms of our purposes of constructing rhetorical analysis, this is what the template is going to look like. Premise 1 is an argument containing the terms and devices. It's always going to be 3 sentences long, no matter the expository mode. So we know on FRQ1, the College Board says 3 times, your argument must be central. I wish they would say that for all 6 FRQs, Lang and Lit, because it's expository writing. And expository writing is an act of arguing. So even though we're performing rhetorical analysis, we got to argue rhetorically. So I want to take 3 sentences to set up that argument, to ensure that the kid does not slip into plot summation. We don't want it to read like a cliff note, right, of Dave Barry's editorial. Second premise, beginning 4th sentence, is the textual support, and it's the teeter-totter balance between the quoting and the paraphrasing. Don't do one far more at the expense of the other. And the conclusion of the body paragraph, and I want to emphasize that, the conclusion of the body paragraph, not the conclusion paragraph of the essay, houses the textual analysis. And it's your links, your promise, your echo. I tell students all the time, first premise is a promise. Go shake hands with that brother at the end. Echo that thesis. Echo the prompt, right? A syllogism comes full circle upon itself. So let's take a look at a whole example here. So students often ask good questions, and their first question is this: where do I begin my first body paragraph? And I tell them, begin right where the author begins. So you'll see my students start their body paragraphs with transitions like this. Right from the onset, Barry positions himself. And what that does is it cues the reader into knowing that the kid is organized, that they have a logical sequential progression throughout their essay, that they are going to sustain the line of reasoning. So start where Barry starts and methodically hammer your way through it. All right. The second question is this. Students say, all right, Mr. Kuhn, you must have a number for us, because if you want exactly 4 sentences for an introductory paragraph, you must want a certain number of sentences for the body paragraph, and I do. I tell them shoot for 10, don't exceed 12. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers don't have enough support and analysis to really flesh out an argument and substantiate anything of any substance. So, all right, 3 sentences. Go picking the terms and devices that are featured early in Barry's piece. So look how we do this. Right from the onset, Barry positions himself as a trustworthy, objective news reporter who's going to present the simple facts to staying safe from the impending hurricanes destined to hit the south of Florida. So we're going to talk about his ethos. So that his advice and reasoning are easy to process, he often enumerates. So now we got ethos and enumeration, the facts. So the facts is in quotes. So I'm kind of insinuating here when we use air quotes that we might be talking about sarcasm, perhaps. I'm setting up a discussion for that. But as is clear, these simple truths house the inherent paradox of the situation as well as the central ironies. So if I put this in the language of a promise, which I ask my students to do, I say, in your first premise, what are you promising me? We're going to talk about ethos. We're going to talk about the reasoning, so the logic, and we're going to talk about some ironies, some paradoxes, and maybe even possibly, because we inferred it, we insinuated some sarcasm. So, fourth sentence begins the second premise. Let's start quoting and paraphrasing. So, since you're saying right from the onset, you should be focusing at the top of the passage. Most hurricane seasons commence with a weather person pointing to some radar blob out in the Atlantic while making 2 basic meteorological points. There's no need to panic. We could all be killed. All right. So when my students quote, I want it to sound silky smooth and bedded. And there's a simple way to do that. If you keep the quote small and place a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote, that should happen. This quote is a little bit on the long side, but I'll take it. It's fine. Immediately, Barry presents the bizarre nature of this ritualized event. Meteorologists have no clue whatsoever how things are going to unfold. Each subsequent year could be the big one. So note, take small quotes. Yet the irony is that the media simultaneously calls for calm and urgent action. All right, well, why are we doing this? Because we're talking about paradoxes and irony, so I need some quotes to demonstrate that. I either need some quotes or paraphrases to show that. All right. To sustain and further bolster his ethos, all right, we promised a discussion of that, so let's get into it. Barry situates himself as a Hurricane Andrew survivor, no small test of fate. His humor and sarcasm up until this point has been subtle, but reading between the lines, quite literally the parentheticals, so we got a little bit of syntax analysis going on in here. It is clear that Barry is busting the chops of his fellow Floridians and that they can be recognized because they still smell faintly of BO mixed with gasoline. And again, throughout the body paragraphs too, you want to do that teeter-totter balance of the colloquial, the vernacular, and the academic. So the vocab's high in this, clearly, but it's in wheelhouse. And doing things like bust the chops of, I think really goes well to get that sophistication point. I really think students need to get in the habit of doing that, but they must possess the tier 2 vocabulary in order to pull it off. So we quote, now we got to analyze it. So look at how this proceeds. The 3-point plan, however, no matter how logically solid it is, provides the real zinger. Again, a little colloquial. Floridians really ought to drive to Nebraska and remain there until Halloween. Advice that is never heeded. All right, we have enough support to check off all the promises. We have support for each of these things. So the line of reasoning is intact, but we just can't abandon the syllogism yet. We got to link it all back to the thesis, and we have to link it back to the promise of the first premise. Given that hurricane season is an annual occurrence, Burry finds it humorous and ironic that his state has such ludicrous and flimsy protocols. Nothing really makes sense, but it's what people do. The funny thing is, in being funny, Barry's plan might be the best plan. So again, all taking about 10 to 12 sentences to achieve. That line of reasoning is bulletproof. Arsenic is deadly. My dog ate arsenic. My dog is going to die, right? So we want students to be that deliberate, which is hard to do when they got, 10 to 12 sentences to get lost and get waylaid and go on bird walks. But if you train kids to keep the promise of the first premise, they're going to stay really, really, really tight and then have a chronological sequential order of things, again, is half the battle. What do I do next? You bust out another syllogism. There's still the whole rest of the essay to analyze. We've only analyzed up until the middle of it. We still have the middle and the end. We got to go all the way to the end. So I advise my students for the FRQs on the Lang exam, intro, two bodies, conclusion. That's what I advise my guys to do. So that, when you only have like 38 to 41 minutes to bust out an essay, that's a tall order. So I don't want them doing any more than that. So hopefully you found this to be useful and an easy segue into rhetorical analysis as you begin your academic years. Note, a lot of people are reaching out to me about this. The Teach It Right 5-week mastermind is now being run through the National Writing Project, which is super cool. So I'm still the lead teacher, so I'm the man in charge. So if you want to work with me, you're still working with me. But you get the badge, you get the PD badge of 10 hours of completion of coursework through the National Writing Project. So I know a lot of folks need to get PD hours, and now it's sanctified by the National Writing Project, which is really cool. And as I said, it's 10 hours for a 5-hour course. So we launched the first Teach It Right 5-week mastermind with the National Writing Project just earlier this week at the time of this recording, so August of 2022. And we will be running them on a regular cadence throughout the academic year. So it's a huge success out of the gate. So I'm sure that we'll continue to run it and run it and run it. So that being said, another iron I have in the fire is beginning in September of 2022. I'll be doing regular monthly webinars with Perfection Learning and writing blogs for them. So check them out as well. And then in the fall, November of 2022, I'll be attending NCTE as a lead presenter with Brandon Abden and Tim Freitas. We're going to be presenting together out in Anaheim, California. So look for us there. If you would like these slides or any slides that are featured in my YouTube collection, feel free to give me a line at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And if you want more information about the Teach It Right 5-week mastermind or any of my other courses, visit my website at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. I also could guide you to the National Writing Project, which is www.nwp.org. So all my information is there as well. All right, so hopefully that does the trick for you. Be well, happy teaching, and happy writing.